Host country Peru has one of the lowest carbon dioxide emissions in the Americas, but scientists say it could be among the countries most impacted by climate hazards. It's home to 70% of the world's tropical glaciers, but recent research indicates almost half their ice mass has melted away. CCTV's Dan Collins is live in Lima. Dan, we heard the Peruvian environmental minister. He also mentioned adaptation as a means of curbing global emissions. Why is that important?
Yes, adaptation will be a crucial issue at this summit, as it has been over the last 2 decades of climate change summits. And when I say adaptation, I mean adaptation to climate change, because many developing nations around the world are disproportionately affected by the impacts of climate change when they weren't responsible for causing it. That was the industrialized, richer nations. So the question of how they can be compensated for their loss and damage has been an issue over previous summits, and it continues to be a very tricky business to try and work out how that process is going to work finally. Hopefully by the end of these 2 weeks they will arrive at some kind of conclusion to that. But people are adapting to climate change on their own, as I found out in the host nation Peru when I visited the climate change trail on a glacier.
Drip by drip, this glacier is melting before your very eyes. After taking thousands of years to form, scientists say it could disappear in as little as 10 years. Researchers say half of it, 52.12% to be exact, has melted away in the last 18 years. But as the ice disappeared, a new tourist attraction emerged.
A climate change route is perhaps not what your average tourist is looking for when visiting Peru's largest cluster of snow-capped peaks. But there are a few places in the world that illustrate global warming quite like this melting ice cap. And as for the locals, it's their last chance to lure tourists back to this, the Pastoruri Glacier, before it disappears forever.
As the most accessible glacier in Peru's White Mountain Range, or Cordillera Blanca, it used to be a major attraction.
Many tourists used to come and head up the glacier. They even used to ski on it and have fun playing in the snow. By contrast, nowadays they don't come in such big numbers, and they can't climb it because it's melted by more than 50%.
Here's how it's changed since 1986. And as the ice has shrunk, so has the number of tourists, dwindling to around a third of the 100,000 or so visitors in the 1990s.
Yeah, I knew a little bit about it, but mostly we're here to enjoy what we can of the environment while it's still here, so that was our main motivation to come.
This was all caused by man's actions. It's tragic how we're destroying such wonderful scenery. Before we could access this whole area. Now we can't enter because of the danger from falling ice.
It's still stunning, but scientifically speaking, it can no longer be called a glacier, as it doesn't build up ice in the winter to release in the summer. As it's receded by more than half a kilometre, this lake has formed in its place. In fact, the range has more than 1,000 new hidden lakes, but minerals released from newly exposed rocks render the water undrinkable. Glaciers have always been a crucial water source in Peru. As they go, people must adapt and learn, says park guide Selwyn Valverde.
I hope with all the work we've done to create a climate change route, it'll continue to improve and become a way of learning about climate change even after the ice disappears.
With hundreds of snowy peaks, the Huascarán Park is perfectly placed to show the world the impacts of warming and, for many, what their future may hold. At the entrance to this UNESCO Biosphere Reserve, a small exhibition puts these changes in a more historical perspective. Climate change tourism, one way the humans who live here are adapting to survive.
Wow, Dan, really incredible images in your piece. So how is this two-week conference helping developing countries adapt to climate change?
Well, what we're seeing right now is with 195 nations plus the EU, representatives all present here in one place, there's a great exchange of experiences. There's plenty of seminars and workshops to talk about how these countries and interchange information about how they're adapting to climate change. But at the end of the day, it's going to come down to hard cash. And that's why there's the Green Climate Fund, which is one of the major instrument of the UN Climate Conference to try and tackle those issues. It's basically a fund set up in which rich countries put money to help poor developing nations. But so far, it's fallen well short of the target which has been set. It's aimed to save some $100 billion every year until 2020. So far, it hasn't reached the minimum target this year of $10 billion. It's a public-private fund which is trying to help in a range of ways. It could be anything from replanting trees to building infrastructure to help against disasters. And it's working with poorer nations in Africa and Asia, and also particularly the small island nations, which is a negotiating bloc. These are people who living in the Pacific Islands who are being threatened by rising sea levels, which is threatening the very existence of where they live. So there's still much progress to be made on this crucial issue and a lot more money to be donated by the developed nations.
All right, thank you so much. CCTV's Dan Collins live in Lima, Peru.